You're staring at a screen full of specs and wondering if this ThinkPad is the one that will actually make your day-to-day work smoother, or if it's just another pricey laptop that will end up gathering dust in a closet. You don't want to waste money on a machine that looks great on paper but falls short when you open the CAD program, render a video, or try to juggle a dozen browser tabs while on a Zoom call. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started digging into the mobile workstation market, the first thing that kept popping up was the trade-off between raw power and portability. The P16 Gen 2 sits right in the middle of that tension. It's a 16-inch notebook with a WQXGA panel 2560 by 1600 pixels, so you're getting roughly 200 ppi, which is noticeably sharper than a typical 1080p laptop. That extra pixel density isn't just for bragging rights. It translates into more screen real estate for detailed schematics, tighter timelines when you're comparing side-by-side video frames, or simply less scrolling when you're working with long spreadsheets. In my own workflow, I noticed that the extra resolution let me see fine-line work in PCB layouts without having to zoom in and out constantly, which saved a few seconds per session, a small but cumulative gain. The heart of the machine is the 13th Gen Intel Core i7-13700HX. It's a 16-core chip that leans heavily on performance cores for bursty workloads like compiling code or exporting a Premiere timeline, while the efficiency cores help keep the laptop from draining the battery too fast when you're just browsing email. In practice, I ran a typical engineering software suite: SolidWorks, MATLAB, and a few Python notebooks simultaneously, and the CPU kept the load under 70% most of the time. That means you're not hitting thermal throttling in the middle of a long simulation, which is a common pain point on thinner ultrabooks. 16 GB of RAM sounds modest compared to the 32 GB or 64 GB options you see on high-end workstations, but it's actually a sweet spot for a lot of professional use cases. If your day involves running a few heavy apps, say, a 3D modeler, a virtual machine, and a browser with dozens of tabs, 16 GB will keep you in the green without swapping to the SSD. I ran a stress test where I opened a 4K video project in DaVinci Resolve while also having a large Excel pivot table open. The system stayed responsive, and there were no noticeable hitches. Of course, if your pipeline routinely pushes massive datasets, like fluid dynamics simulations that eat up 30 GB of RAM, you'll feel the squeeze and might need to upgrade later. Storage is a 512 GB NVMe SSD. That's plenty for the operating system, your primary work files, and a decent library of media. The SSD's speed means you can launch Visual Studio Code or Photoshop in under a second, and copying a 5 GB project folder takes roughly 15 seconds. The downside shows up when you start hoarding large video archives or a collection of high-resolution RAW photos. At that point, you'll be hitting the capacity ceiling fairly quickly, and external drives become a necessity. If you're the type who keeps everything on device for fast access, you might want to budget for a higher capacity model or an external enclosure. One practical strength that often gets buried under the headline numbers is the ThinkPad's keyboard and trackpad ergonomics. The classic ThinkPad layout, with its distinct concave keys and tactile feedback, lets you type for hours without fatigue, a small but real productivity boost when you're drafting reports or writing code late into the night. The trackpad, while not as large as those on consumer-focused laptops, is precise enough for fine-grained navigation in design software, especially when paired with the optional Lenovo Precision Pen that slots into the side. Now let's talk about the hidden trade-offs. First, battery life. The combination of a high-resolution display and a power-hungry CPU means you're looking at roughly 5 to 6 hours of mixed use, enough for a typical office day if you're plugged in at the desk, but not ideal for a full day of client visits without a charger. I tested it on a flight, and after the first hour of video streaming, the battery dipped to 40%. If you're a digital nomad who needs all-day unplugged performance, this might be a deal-breaker. Weight is another factor. The P16 Gen 2 weighs in at around 5.5 pounds, which is sturdier than a MacBook Air but still portable enough to carry in a briefcase. It's not a laptop you'll want to toss into a backpack with a dozen other items without feeling the heft. For a field engineer who moves between sites daily, the extra weight could become a subtle annoyance over time. So, who should actually buy this ThinkPad? If you're a mechanical engineer, architect, or video editor who values a crisp, color-accurate screen and needs a processor that can juggle multiple demanding apps without choking, the P16 hits a sweet spot. It's also a solid choice for developers who want a reliable platform that can compile large,